The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform. After 15 years serving as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, he had developed a keen eye for spotting unusual behavior among the thousands of tourists who gathered daily outside the palace gates. His training had taught him to remain alert while maintaining the stoic composure expected of his position. On this particular Tuesday in September, the crowd seemed larger than usual. School groups mixed with international visitors, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family or witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus stood at his designated post near the Victoria Memorial, his practiced gaze sweeping across the sea of faces and cameras. It was then that he noticed her. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, stood completely still amid the bustling crowd. While everyone else moved and chatted excitedly, she remained frozen in place, her wide eyes fixed on something beyond the palace gates. Marcus followed her gaze and saw she was staring intently at a white delivery van parked along the street. The girl's behavior struck him as odd. She wasn't taking photos like the other children, nor was she showing any interest in the palace itself. Her entire focus was centered on that ordinary-looking van. Marcus noticed she was alone with no visible parents or guardians nearby. Her clothes were neat but simple, and she clutched a small backpack tightly against her chest. As minutes passed, the girl never moved from her spot. Other tourists flowed around her like water around a stone, but she remained completely absorbed in watching the van. Marcus felt a growing sense of unease. In his years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this situation felt wrong. The girl's lips were moving slightly, as if she were speaking to herself or counting something. Her small hands gripped the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Marcus could see tears beginning to form in her eyes, though she made no sound of distress. When a group of loud tourists accidentally bumped into her, the girl barely seemed to notice. She simply steadied herself and continued her vigilant watch of the van. This level of concentration in such a young child was deeply concerning to Marcus. He began to scan the area more carefully, looking for any adults who might be connected to her. The delivery van itself appeared unremarkable. It bore the logo of a local flower company and seemed to be making a routine delivery to one of the nearby shops. The driver had already unloaded several arrangements and was now inside conducting his business. Nothing about the vehicle or its occupant seemed threatening or unusual, yet the girl's fixation continued. She had now been standing in the same spot for nearly 20 minutes, never taking her eyes off the van for more than a few seconds. Marcus noticed that whenever the van's engine made any sound or when people walked too close to it, the girl would tense up visibly, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Other guards in the area were beginning to notice the situation as well. Marcus caught the eye of his colleague stationed near the palace gates and nodded toward the girl. The unspoken communication between experienced security personnel conveyed his growing concern about the unusual scene unfolding before them. The girl suddenly took a small step forward, then stopped herself. She repeated this motion several times as if fighting an internal battle between approaching the van and staying safely away. Her distress was becoming more apparent with each passing moment, though she continued to maintain her silent vigil. Marcus realized that his duty extended beyond protecting the royal family and the palace grounds. This child was clearly in some form of distress, and his training had prepared him to recognize when civilian intervention might be necessary. The question was whether to approach her directly or to first try to locate her guardians. As he weighed his options, the girl suddenly turned her head and looked directly at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the crowded courtyard. In that instant, Marcus saw something that chilled him to the bone. The look in her young eyes was not one of childhood curiosity or even normal fear. It was the expression of someone who had witnessed something terrible and was desperately trying to communicate a message that adults weren't understanding. The girl raised one trembling hand and pointed at the van, then looked back at Marcus with an urgency that transcended words. She was trying to tell him something important, something that couldn't wait for proper protocols or bureaucratic procedures. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he realized that whatever was happening, he might be the only person in a position to help. Marcus made his decision. Breaking protocol slightly, he began walking toward the young girl, maintaining his professional demeanor while keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. As he approached, he could see her small body trembling. Though whether from cold, fear, or something else entirely, he couldn't determine. "Hello there," Marcus said gently, crouching down to the girl's eye level, while still maintaining a clear view of the van she had been watching. "Are you here with your family today?" The girl's eyes darted between Marcus and the van, her breathing quick and shallow. She shook her head rapidly, indicating she was alone, but her gaze never left the vehicle for more than a few seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He took my sister," she said, her words causing Marcus's blood to run cold. "Yesterday after school. I saw him put her in that van." Marcus felt his training kick in immediately. Child abduction cases required swift and precise action, but he also needed to gather accurate information without traumatizing the girl further. He glanced back at the van, noting the license plate number and mentally cataloging every detail he could observe about the vehicle and its surroundings. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, pulling out a small notepad while keeping his voice steady and reassuring. "Emma," she replied, finally looking directly at him. "Emma Martinez. My sister is Sophia, she's only 6. Tears began streaming down her face as she continued. "I tried to tell the police yesterday, but they said I must be confused. They said delivery vans all look the same to children." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the dismissive treatment this child had apparently received, but he maintained his calm exterior. "Emma, I believe you. Can you tell me exactly what you saw yesterday?" The girl's story began to pour out in fragments. She and her sister had been walking home from their primary school in Westminster when Sophia had dropped her favorite toy, a small stuffed elephant. As Sophia bent to pick it up, a man in coveralls had approached them. He had seemed friendly at first, asking if they needed help finding their way. "Sophia wasn't supposed to talk to strangers," Emma said, wiping her nose on her sleeve, but he knew her name. "He said their mom had sent him to pick them up because she was running late from work." Emma's voice broke as she continued. "I didn't believe him because Mom always picks us up herself, but Sophia did. She got in the van." Marcus was taking detailed notes while simultaneously signaling to his colleague at the palace gates. The other guard, recognizing the urgency of the situation, began making his way over while speaking quietly into his radio. Marcus needed backup, but he also needed to keep Emma talking while the van was still in sight. "When Sophia got in, what happened then?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I screamed for her to get out, but the man grabbed my arm really hard." Emma rolled up her sleeve to reveal fading bruises that were clearly finger-shaped. "He said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to Sophia. Then he drove away really fast." The evidence of physical assault on the child made Marcus's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Emma, you were very brave to come here today. How did you know to look for this van?" "I followed him," she said simply. "After school today, I didn't go home. I walked around the neighborhood looking for the van. I saw it parked outside a house on Eaton Square, and I followed it here." Her voice became more urgent. "He's been making deliveries all morning, but I think Sophia might still be inside." Marcus's heart raced as he realized the implications. If Emma was correct, there could be an abducted child in that van right now, mere meters away from one of the most secure locations in London. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he spent his days protecting the royal family, a child might be suffering just beyond the palace walls. "Emma, I need you to stay right here with my friend," Marcus said, indicating his approaching colleague. "I'm going to check on that van, but I need you to be very still and quiet, okay?" The girl nodded eagerly, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since he had begun talking to her. Marcus stood and briefed his colleague quickly while keeping his eyes on the delivery van. The driver had emerged from a nearby shop and was loading his empty trolley back into the vehicle. As Marcus watched, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Through the van's rear windows, which were partially obscured by flower arrangements, he could see what appeared to be a small movement. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but his trained eye caught it immediately. "Request immediate backup," he told his colleague quietly. "Potential child abduction in progress. White delivery van, license plate." He rattled off the number he had memorized. "Do not let that vehicle leave the area." Emma tugged at his trouser leg. "Officer, there's something else," she said, her voice urgent. The man, he wasn't a real delivery person. His uniform didn't fit right, and he kept looking around like he was scared someone would see him. Real delivery people don't act like that. Marcus looked down at the observant child and realized that her attention to detail might be the key to saving her sister. Emma had noticed discrepancies that adult witnesses might have missed. Her fixation on the van wasn't the behavior of a confused child, but rather the desperate vigilance of someone who knew exactly what she had seen. The delivery van's engine started, and Marcus knew he was running out of time to act. The sound of the van's engine turning over sent a jolt of adrenaline through Marcus's system. He had mere seconds to make a decision that could mean the difference between life and death for a 6-year-old girl. The protocols he had learned during his years of service had never prepared him for a situation quite like this. But his instincts as both a protector and a human being were screaming at him to act. "Keep Emma safe," he instructed his colleague tersely, then began moving swiftly toward the van. He couldn't run without potentially alerting the driver and causing him to panic, but every step felt crucial. As he approached, Marcus could see the man behind the wheel checking his mirrors and preparing to pull away from the curb. The driver appeared to be in his late 30s, with unkempt brown hair and several days' worth of stubble. His delivery uniform was indeed ill-fitting, as Emma had observed. The shirt was too large and the company logo looked slightly faded, as if it had been washed many times or was possibly counterfeit. Most tellingly, his hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. Marcus positioned himself directly in front of the van, making it impossible for the driver to leave without acknowledging his presence. He approached the driver's side window with the authoritative stride that had served him well in his role as a royal guard, projecting confidence and control even as his heart hammered in his chest. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, tapping on the window. "Royal Guard Marcus Thompson. I need to speak with you for a moment." The driver's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of the mild confusion or cooperation that an innocent person might display when approached by law enforcement, the man's face went pale, and his eyes darted frantically around the area as if looking for an escape route. "Is there a problem, officer?" the driver asked, rolling down his window only part way. His voice was tight with barely controlled panic, and Marcus could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool September weather. "Routine security check," Marcus replied, his trained eyes scanning the interior of the van. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind if I take a look at your delivery manifest?" The driver's hands fumbled as he reached for paperwork, dropping several invoices onto the floor of the van. As he bent to retrieve them, Marcus caught a glimpse of something in the back of the vehicle that made his blood freeze. Partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement, he could see a small sneaker, the kind a young child might wear. "Actually, sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Marcus said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used during official palace duties. He positioned himself to block any attempt the driver might make to flee on foot, while simultaneously signaling to his backup, who were now approaching from multiple directions. The driver's composure cracked completely. "Look, I don't know what you think you've seen, but I'm just trying to do my job here. I've got deliveries to make, and I'm already running behind schedule." "I understand your concern about your schedule," Marcus replied evenly, "but I still need you to step out of the vehicle now." As additional security personnel arrived on scene, Marcus could hear a faint sound coming from the back of the van. It was soft, almost imperceptible over the noise of the London traffic and tourist chatter, but unmistakably human. A quiet whimpering like that of a frightened child trying not to make noise. The driver must have heard it too, because his entire demeanor changed. The pretense of being an innocent deliveryman evaporated, replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered criminal. His eyes flicked between Marcus and the gathering security officers, clearly weighing his rapidly diminishing options. "There's a child in your van," Marcus stated firmly, abandoning any pretense of this being a routine check. "I'm going to need you to open the rear doors immediately." "I don't know what you're talking about," the driver stammered, but his denial lacked conviction. His hands were visibly shaking now, and sweat was running down his face despite his attempts to appear calm. Marcus stepped closer to the van, and the whimpering sound became slightly more audible. It was definitely a child, and from Emma's description, it was likely her sister Sophia. The realization that he was potentially moments away from rescuing an abducted child filled Marcus with a mixture of determination and rage that surprised him with its intensity. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step out of the vehicle and open the rear doors," Marcus said, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." But those doors are going to be opened. The driver looked around desperately, perhaps hoping to see some avenue of escape, but the area was now effectively surrounded by security personnel, palace guards, police officers responding to the radio calls, and even some alert members of the public had formed a loose perimeter around the van. Behind Marcus, he could hear Emma's voice calling out urgently, "That's him. That's the man who took Sophia." Her identification of the driver removed any lingering doubt about the situation they were dealing with. The driver's last-ditch attempt at deception came in the form of an aggressive denial. "This is harassment," he shouted, though his voice cracked with fear. "I'm going to report all of you. I haven't done anything wrong." But even as he protested, the sound from the back of the van became more distinct. It was definitely a child's voice, weak and frightened, calling out, "Emma? Emma, are you there?" The sound of Sophia's voice seemed to galvanize everyone present. The pretense was over, and the real urgency of the situation became crystal clear to all involved. The moment Sophia's weak voice calling for her sister reached their ears, the entire dynamic of the situation shifted dramatically. Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct that transcended his professional training. This was no longer just a security matter. It was about saving a child who had been suffering alone and afraid for over 24 hours. "Sophia," Emma cried out from behind the security cordon, her voice breaking with relief and desperation. "Sophia, I'm here." "I found you." The driver made one final attempt to salvage his rapidly deteriorating situation. "Look, there's been some kind of misunderstanding here," he said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "I can explain everything if you just give me a chance." Marcus had heard enough. With practiced efficiency, he coordinated with the arriving police officers to secure the scene while ensuring the safety of everyone present. "Sir, you're under arrest," he announced firmly. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to exercise that right." As the driver was being handcuffed and read his rights, Marcus personally took charge of opening the van's rear doors. His hands were steady despite the gravity of the moment, years of training having prepared him to remain calm under pressure. When the doors swung open, the sight that greeted him would remain etched in his memory forever. Sofia Martinez was huddled in the corner of the van's cargo area, partially hidden behind flower arrangements that had clearly been positioned to conceal her from casual observation. She was alive, conscious, and appeared to be physically unharmed, though her clothes were wrinkled and she looked exhausted and dehydrated. Her large brown eyes, so similar to her sister's, were wide with fear and confusion. "Hello, Sophia," Marcus said gently, climbing carefully into the van to reach the frightened child. "My name is Marcus, and I'm here to help you. Your sister Emma has been looking for you everywhere." At the mention of Emma's name, Sophia's expression changed from terror to desperate hope. "Emma found me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and dehydration. "She did," Marcus confirmed, carefully lifting the small girl from her hiding place. "Emma was very brave and very smart. She never stopped looking for you, and she helped us find you." As Marcus carried Sophia out of the van, the crowd of onlookers began to applaud spontaneously. Tourists who had come to see the palace ceremony had instead witnessed a real-life rescue, and the emotion of the moment was palpable. Even the usually stoic palace guards allowed smiles to cross their faces as they watched the reunion unfold. Emma broke free from the security officer, who had been watching her, and ran toward her sister, with tears streaming down her face. "Sophia, oh, Sophia, I was so scared." She sobbed as Marcus carefully placed the younger girl on her feet. The two sisters embraced with an intensity that brought tears to the eyes of many witnesses. Sophia clung to Emma as if afraid she might disappear, while Emma whispered reassurances and apologies for not being able to protect her initially. Their reunion was both heartbreaking and beautiful, a testament to the unbreakable bond between siblings. Paramedics who had been called to the scene quickly began examining Sophia, checking her vital signs and overall condition. While she appeared to be physically unharmed, they were concerned about dehydration and the psychological trauma she had endured. She would need to be taken to the hospital for a thorough evaluation. "I want to stay with Emma," Sophia said firmly when the paramedics explained they needed to take her for medical checks. It was the first full sentence she had spoken since being rescued, and her determination was evident despite her weakened state. "Emma can come with you," Marcus assured her, having already coordinated with the medical team. She's not leaving your side again. As the investigation began in earnest, disturbing details about the driver's actions began to emerge. The van had been stolen 3 days earlier from a legitimate flower delivery company, and the uniform he wore had been purchased online. Most chillingly, police found evidence suggesting this had not been his first attempted abduction. Detective Sarah Williams, who had taken charge of the case, interviewed both girls at the hospital while child psychologists and social workers provided support. Emma's detailed account of the abduction was remarkably accurate, and her description of events matched the physical evidence found in the van. Emma saved her sister's life, Detective Williams later told Marcus, if she hadn't been so persistent, so observant, and so brave in continuing to look for Sophia despite being dismissed by other adults. This could have ended very differently. Marcus found himself deeply moved by Emma's courage and determination. At only 8 years old, she had shown more persistence and clear thinking than many adults might have demonstrated in similar circumstances. Her refusal to accept that adults knew better, her careful observation of details, and her willingness to trust him with the truth had been the key factors in Sophia's rescue. The girl's mother, Maria Martinez, arrived at the hospital in a state of near collapse. She had been frantically searching for both daughters when she discovered that Emma had never arrived home from school, and Sophia had been missing since the previous day. The police had initially treated Sophia's disappearance as a possible custody dispute, since the girl's father lived in another city, causing crucial delays in the investigation. "I owe you everything," Maria said to Marcus through her tears as she held both daughters close. "Emma told me about the kind guard who listened to her when no one else would." Marcus felt humbled by her gratitude. He had simply done what his conscience and training had demanded, but he understood that for this family, his decision to take Emma seriously had meant everything. In the days following Sophia's rescue, the investigation into her abductor revealed the true scope of what had been prevented. Detective Williams discovered that the man, whose name was revealed to be David Crawford, had been planning the abduction for weeks. His apartment contained detailed surveillance photos of several local schools, maps of walking routes commonly used by children, and disturbing evidence that suggested Sophia was not intended to be his only victim. Crawford had been released from prison only 6 months earlier, after serving time for attempted child abduction in another county. His probation officer had lost track of him 3 weeks prior to Sophia's kidnapping, but had failed to report his disappearance to local authorities. The systematic failures that had allowed him to operate freely in London became the subject of intense scrutiny from both law enforcement and child protection agencies. Marcus found himself called upon repeatedly to give testimony about the events of that September morning. Each time he recounted the story, he was struck anew by how easily the situation could have gone differently. If Emma had given up her vigil just an hour earlier, if he had dismissed her concerns as the imagination of a confused child, if the van had been parked in a different location where she couldn't maintain her watch, Sophia might never have been found. The media attention surrounding the case was intense but generally positive. News outlets praised Emma's bravery and Marcus's quick thinking, while also highlighting the failures in the system that had initially dismissed a child's eyewitness account. Child safety advocates used the case to push for better training for police officers in handling reports from young witnesses. Emma and Sophia's recovery progressed steadily, though not without challenges. Sophia experienced nightmares and anxiety, particularly around strangers and vehicles. She required ongoing counseling to help process the trauma of her ordeal. Emma, meanwhile, struggled with guilt over not being able to prevent her sister's initial abduction. Despite everyone's assurances that she had acted with remarkable courage and intelligence, Marcus made a point of visiting the girls regularly during their recovery. What had begun as a professional follow-up evolved into a genuine friendship with the Martinez family. He found that spending time with Emma and Sophia helped him process his own emotional response to the case, which had affected him more deeply than any situation he had encountered in his 15 years of service. "Why did you believe me when the other police didn't?" Emma asked him during one of his visits to their home. She was coloring at the kitchen table while Sophia played nearby, both girls appearing more relaxed and happy than they had in weeks. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes adults think they know better than children about what children have seen or experienced," he said. But you knew exactly what you had witnessed, and you described it clearly and consistently. Most importantly, you never gave up trying to help your sister, even when people didn't listen to you. The conversation made Marcus reflect on his own training and the assumptions that law enforcement officers sometimes made about the reliability of child witnesses. Emma's detailed observations and accurate recall had been dismissed by other adults who assumed a child her age couldn't provide credible testimony. Her persistence in continuing to search for Sophia, rather than simply accepting adult assurances that she must be mistaken, had ultimately saved her sister's life. 3 months after the rescue, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The girls' school was holding a special assembly to honor Emma's bravery, and they wanted Marcus to attend as a guest speaker. The event would also serve to educate other children about safety, procedures, and the importance of trusting their instincts when something seemed wrong. Standing before an auditorium full of children Emma and Sophia's age, Marcus felt a profound sense of responsibility. These young faces looked up to him with trust and admiration, but he knew that the real hero of the story was sitting in the front row, still sometimes shy about the attention her actions had brought her. "The most important thing I learned from Emma," he told the assembled students, "is that children often see things that adults miss. You know when something doesn't feel right, and you should never be afraid to speak up about it, even if adults tell you that you're wrong." After his speech, several children approached him with questions and stories of their own. Some described situations they had witnessed that made them uncomfortable. Others asked about how to stay safe when walking to and from school. Marcus realized that Emma's story had opened up important conversations about child safety that might not have happened otherwise. The legal proceedings against David Crawford moved forward steadily. His defense attorney attempted to argue that the arrest had been improper, that there hadn't been sufficient evidence to justify detaining his client. However, the physical evidence found in the van, combined with Sophia's testimony and Emma's detailed eyewitness account, made his guilt undeniable. Crawford eventually pleaded guilty to kidnapping, child endangerment, and multiple related charges. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. The judge specifically noted Emma's bravery and the quick thinking of the law enforcement officers involved in preventing what could have been a much more tragic outcome. For Marcus, the case had fundamentally changed how he approached his duties. While he continued to serve as a royal guard, protecting the palace and its occupants, he had gained a deeper appreciation for his role as a protector of all citizens, not just those within the palace walls. The experience had reminded him that heroism often came from paying attention to details that others might overlook, and being willing to act on behalf of those who couldn't protect themselves. 2 years after that pivotal September morning, Marcus Thompson stood once again at his post near the Victoria Memorial, watching the familiar flow of tourists and visitors. The daily routine of palace security continued much as it always had, but his perspective on his role had been permanently transformed by his encounter with Emma and Sophia Martinez. The girls had grown and thrived in the time since Sophia's rescue. Emma, now 10 years old, had developed a reputation at school for her keen observation skills and her willingness to speak up when she noticed something amiss. She had helped locate a lost younger student who had wandered away during a field trip and had reported suspicious behavior by a maintenance worker that led to the discovery. He had been stealing from school supplies. Sophia, though still occasionally troubled by memories of her ordeal, had largely recovered from the trauma. She remained closer to Emma than most siblings, their bond strengthened by the shared experience they had survived. The family had moved to a new neighborhood for a fresh start, but they maintained regular contact with Marcus, who had become something of an extended family member. The case had broader implications that continued to ripple through law enforcement and child protection systems. Police departments across the country had implemented new training programs specifically focused on interviewing child witnesses and taking their accounts seriously from the outset. The failures that had initially led to Emma's report being dismissed were studied as examples of how systemic biases could endanger children. Marcus had been commended officially for his actions, receiving recognition from both his superiors in the Royal Guard and from the Metropolitan Police. More meaningful to him than the formal acknowledgments, however, were the letters he received from other parents whose children had been helped by the increased attention to child safety that Emma's case had inspired. One particularly moving letter came from a mother in Manchester whose 7-year-old son had reported seeing a man following children near his school, thanks to the new protocols inspired by Emma's case. Police took the boy's report seriously from the beginning. Their investigation revealed that the man was indeed a registered sex offender who had violated his parole conditions. His arrest prevented what investigators believed could have been multiple abductions. The friendship between Marcus and the Martinez family had evolved into something none of them had expected, but all treasured. He attended Emma's school plays and Sophia's dance recitals, celebrated birthdays and holidays with them, and served as a role model for both girls as they navigated their growing years. Emma had expressed interest in possibly becoming a police officer herself when she grew up, inspired by the positive outcome of her own experience with law enforcement. She volunteered at local community safety events, helping to educate other children about staying safe and trusting their instincts. "I want to help other kids the way you helped me," she told Marcus during one of his visits. "I want them to know that adults will listen if they just find the right person to talk to." Sophia, meanwhile, had channeled her experience into a passion for helping other children who had experienced trauma. Despite her young age, she participated in art therapy programs designed to help children express their feelings about difficult experiences. Her drawings and stories had been used as examples to help counselors understand how children process and recover from traumatic events. The annual memorial service for child safety awareness, established in the wake of their case, had become a significant event in London. Families, law enforcement officers, child protection workers, and community volunteers gathered each September to remember children who had been lost to violence and to celebrate those who had been saved. At the most recent service, Marcus found himself reflecting on the random nature of the events that had brought his path together with Emma's that morning outside the palace. If he had been stationed at a different post, if the van had been parked elsewhere, if Emma had given up her search just minutes earlier, the outcome could have been tragically different. The realization had made him more attentive to his surroundings in all aspects of his life. He noticed when elderly people seemed confused or lost on busy streets, when tourists appeared to be in distress, when children seemed separated from their families. His experience with Emma had taught him that being truly observant meant looking beyond the obvious and paying attention to behavior that seemed out of place. David Crawford remained in prison, where he would stay for many years to come. His case had become a study subject in criminal justice programs, examined as an example of how predators operated and how swift law enforcement response could prevent escalation of crimes against children. As Marcus concluded another day of duty and prepared to head home, he thought about the lesson that an 8-year-old girl had taught him about the importance of listening, really listening, when someone was trying to communicate something important. Emma's courage in continuing to search for her sister, her detailed observations that provided crucial evidence, and her trust in sharing her story with him had created a chain of events that saved Sophia's life and potentially the lives of other children who might have become Crawford's victims. The experience had reinforced Marcus's belief in the fundamental mission of his work, protecting the innocent and vulnerable, whether that meant guarding the royal family within the palace walls or recognizing when a child in the crowd outside needed his help. The core principle remained the same: vigilance, courage, and the willingness to act when action was needed. Standing in the same spot where Emma had kept her desperate vigil 2 years earlier, Marcus smiled as he remembered her determined face and the way she had pointed at that van, trusting him to understand what she was trying to tell him. The memory served as a daily reminder that heroism often came in small packages, and that the most important victories were sometimes won not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of taking a child's words seriously when she said someone needed help.